that guy just could run a 2:18 marathon and go about his day. And I was like, whoa, this is the sickest thing ever. I have like my 2 Boston Marathon bibs with my name on it that I got to run with the pro field. And those were just like 2 of the sickest days of my running life. As my friend likes to say, without a goal, you can't score. And so you were like, I'm going for a record. And I'm like, okay, now I'm interested because he could fail. And with failure as a potential, then I'm intrigued. When they moved the standard to 2:16, I was like, thank you, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go home. Running, the clock does not care. It just doesn't matter. Like, I grew up a soccer player and we would like talk shit and try to get in each other's heads. And I loved that side of the sport. But like, running doesn't care about your shit talk.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome, everyone. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can now also check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review. If you do that and tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free 30-minute consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, and the show Patreon page, and other ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some new offerings. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. A big thanks to Element Electrolytes, Delta G Ketones, ProBio Nutrition, and Training Peaks for supporting the podcast. I have links and promotions to these brands in the show notes, but you can also get them here. If you want to check out Element Electrolytes, head over to drinklmnt.com/HPO. That'll get you a free sample pack with your first purchase. At deltagketones.com, if you enter promo code BITTER20, you will get 20% off your next purchase. And if you go to probionutrition.com, enter promo code ENDURANCE, and that will get you 20% off your next purchase. If you're interested in getting deeper into your own training data, head over to trainingpeaks.com/HPO podcast. All right, Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Man, there's so many things to discuss that I was like, we got to press record. I don't want to chop it up for an hour and then realize we didn't press record.
Yeah, that's the hard part about a topic, like a topic or a person when you're interviewing for a podcast, is you don't want to necessarily just have them show up on the recording and then just like, okay, let's just get into it, make it feel like too formal. But then you could easily spend 15, 20 minutes talking about stuff that would be better recorded and put up on the episode. And then you're rehashing it and it doesn't sound quite as like authentic then.
Yeah, as I just mentioned, because we have only recently met, but I mean, I've known of your running for quite a while. And we were just talking about before we press record, like running is so many different sports all linked together because it's just like right foot, left foot. So to be like, this guy's doing really cool stuff that I guess is related to what I do as a marathoner, but like really started to break my brain. So in a really fun way.
Yeah. And I think that kind of gets into one of the topics that we'll hit on today too, which is just like the storytelling side of things. Because when you think about it, it's take your story, for example, which I think we should get into to some degree, is you spent a good amount of time and energy and focus around chasing a goal of qualifying for the Olympic trials. And at the time, the qualifying time was a 2:19 to get in on the men's side. And you had the unfortunate situation of being the closest to not qualify with a 2:19.02, and then you followed it up with a 2:19.20. And so you hear that and you're like, okay, I got to learn more about this guy. And then you look into the story and you realize, I think your first marathon was like a 3:07 or something like that. So then
as a charity runner. So it was like...
Yeah. And it's just one of those things where I think the story almost presents itself in a way where it catches you. And then as soon as you'd be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Too bad he didn't make it. You see something else. Oh, I got to learn more. And then it pulls you in further and further. And I think it just really highlights that side of, when you think of it, like there's a lot of 2:19 marathoners I don't know. I wish I knew them. 2:19 is a super impressive marathon time, but it's just, you're not going to run into them because you just don't always get exposed to things. But then yours, I get exposed to because of the storytelling, essentially. And I think that's what brings a lot of that together, where we do have this like big running umbrella and then all these little encampments underneath it, that sometimes these stories transcend the little encampment, and then the other ones hear it and think, oh wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's really fair. And I've given it a lot of thought over the years because so I grew up a writer. I worked in design for many years, and I was working at Nike when wrote my first essay about the marathon. So people know me online, both on Instagram and now on Substack, as someone who writes about running. But I backed into that like I backed into marathon. I grew up running, ran in high school, ran at Division III college, but then was so burnt out on it that I gave it up for many years, didn't compete for 7 years, and then got back into marathoning after the Boston Marathon, and was like so appreciative of these moments I was experiencing that I started writing about them a little bit on Instagram. And then I started writing essays about them. And it's a little bit, I'm very thankful that I did that, but I didn't have a grand plan for putting that story out. And this was over a decade ago. The idea of being an influencer, or like being a storyteller, content creator, just wasn't being talked about at that time.
Mhm.
And so I'm a little conflicted, and we can get into it. I'm very thankful that I captured my journey in a format that like left the work till after the event. So I got to take in the event very viscerally, and then I would sit down with a pint the day after and write it all down. And so I am both like, I'm of two minds. Really like that I get to ride along with people who like document their journeys with cameras and all these things. And at the same time, I'm like, man, I studied anthropology in school, and like cameras change, the presence of a camera changes the experience. It doesn't need to always be negative, but I'm thankful that I lived in this bubble of this moment where social media was rising, but we weren't yet trying to document everything while we were doing it. And me and my buddies I'm 45, like we're a slightly different era. And so, yeah, I'm just super thankful that I put my head down, got to work with the running, and then also just got in this rhythm of telling stories on Instagram, telling essays online, such that people got to follow along. But it wasn't my first, like, the following along was a secondary positive experience. And so I'm really like open-minded to what does this look as people tell more stories. But certainly I was in awe of the guys at my peak fitness, got to run around. And at the same time, knew that most of them were pretty anonymous to the rest of the world. They were just like, that guy just could run a 2:18 marathon and go about his day. And I was like, whoa, this is the sickest thing ever. Right behind me, for anyone who can see this, I have like my two Boston Marathon bibs with my name on it that I got to run with the pro field. And those were just like two of the sickest days of my running life. And I was able to be like very present for them because I knew they were going to be like rare moments that I wasn't going to be able to hover in that space for very long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to get into just your story and how that maybe led to the podcast that you have called Road to the Trials podcast, which I think is just a genius idea, because it's when I think of it through my own like kind of listener lens, I want to hear those stories, but there's often a block from like just an accessibility block, because for reasons you mentioned, these people oftentimes have full-time jobs. They oftentimes have other lives, and maybe they are introverts. They really don't want to hop up on Instagram every morning and be like, hey, I'm going out for this 18-mile long run before work. And I can totally appreciate that, because everyone's going to be different in that, but there's still a story there and there's still a thirst for it. So I think like when I think of just this sort of landscape we have now, where we've got influencers who are the opposite of that, where they want nothing more than to tell you their story, and they're really good at it. So they don't even have to be fast. They can just be good storytellers. And then we have these people who are really fast. Maybe they don't want to tell stories, or they're not good at telling stories. They don't know how to, they don't have time to, they don't have the resources to, all sorts of things. We have this audience that engages with both of them, tries to engage with both of them, but there's like these weird differences. And then someone like you steps in and says, hey, maybe I could be a guy that sort of plays medium here and tells some of these stories that aren't being accessed, and show the world of running a little bit more about these individuals who are out there grinding out morning miles and running 2:15 marathons that none of us know about.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. I obsessed. So yeah, my story in short is that I ran 2:29 in 2016, and I was just like top of the world. broke 230 as a man. You're like, yeah. And then I ran 228 and suddenly was like, sad. Are these numbers, is chasing more numbers going to be that interesting? And then my buddies and I ran 223 and people were like, are you going to try to run sub 219? So I've written essays about this, but I went on a 2-year journey with my teammates to try to run sub 219 and qualify for the trials. Ended up running 219.02, like you mentioned, and my best friend and training partner, Patrick Reeves, qualified for the Atlanta trials, go to that event. And I'm just like, this is the pinnacle of marathoning, of the event that I love. So fast forward a couple of years, and this summer we're about to kick off, open the window, as they say, of qualifying, where if you run under now 216 for men and 237 for women, then in March of 28, you'll get to run at this big event. And I'm like, I described it as like a buffet of stories that were just going to be left untouched until like maybe January 2028. Like, we celebrate the fastest marathoners in America when they run at Chicago or Houston, Boston, but there's a whole bunch of men and women who qualify, and it's just like, we'll get to you in 2 years. And then in the final 12 weeks before the race, some stories are told and there's a lot of commotion, but there's really not much time left to tell these people's stories. And we're like, what if I just attempted to interview every single athlete who qualifies? And this could range maybe on average from 300 people over the next 2 years to 500. We'll see. It's growing in excitement. And I'm both super excited by it. It's like a dream come true for me. And yet I'm nervous because, like you're saying, I need to meet someone and try to understand quickly, like, what is it about their story that would be really interesting to the listener? So there's any number of podcasts where it's, let me just let someone tell their story. And I'm like, that's good, but great would be connecting the dots a little bit, helping them not only tell their backstory, but illuminate some of the things they do. And what I found is, it's like any hobby you have. I've been obsessing this range of marathoning for a decade now. So I joke about, I interviewed Turner Wiley, who's sponsored by Brooks, the other day. He ran 209. He did not win the marathon project, but he broke 210, and super good dude, works full time, has a young baby at home. And so he's a great guy. And I just look for the heat or like the things that are fascinating. And he's like, yeah, I run 140 miles a week. And I'm like, okay. And I'll say, I love the marathon, and I keep coming back to it as an obsession because of the interaction of, you need speed and you need strength. And any one thing, if you take it to, it's like the person who's like, I run 150 miles a week, I'm on Instagram. And I'm like, in isolation, running 20 something miles a day is, it's not that it's not hard, but we know it's doable for human. Whereas if you're also trying to optimize for a really high VO2 max and a really high threshold velocity, you're like, okay, now we're talking. That's tension. That's like, we're playing with something that's difficult. And it's not just, it's just hard to solve. There's not one way to solve it. So anyways, Turner was like, I'm like, tell me about this 7-day week and he's adding it all up. And I'm like, wait a second, Turner, we're still short. And he's on Sundays, I'll often run like 3 hours at up tempo. I'm like, how long is that? It's 30 miles. And I'm like, okay, like a 30-mile, 3-hour run is just flat out impressive at the end of a week. So it's just, these are fun little nuggets that Turner wouldn't scream to the world because this is not his demeanor. And I totally respect that, but I wanted to scream it to the world because I'm like, that's sick, man. I just want to celebrate other people's successes.
Yeah, it's interesting because the marathon, I think in general, is maybe one of the more hardest events to really prepare for, because I'm in the ultra world. So in the ultra world, it oftentimes can be, I would say, misunderstood that the further you go or the longer you go, the more impressive or the more difficult it gets. And it's like, you can make anything really difficult. I could do a 100-mile race that would be easier than a 5K if I approach the 5K all in and the 100-mile just casually. And there's a different sort of discomfort and a different sort of challenge with that sort of that amount of time being out there. But the marathon tends to be that distance where it's long enough where, like you said, there's some opportunity to justify running 140 miles per week, but it's also fast enough, especially if you're running a 209. It's fast enough where you still got to be optimizing for the higher end of the aerobic intensity spectrum. And then there's just so few mistakes you can make with that sort of a recipe that I just think it creates a landscape of intrigue around, like, how are these people training? What are they doing? What are they doing maybe differently from their peers? Or what is everybody doing the same? That kind of can give us some ideas of just what can we look at as a universal principle for improvement and things like that. It's a perfect measuring ground, in my opinion, towards that running space.
Yeah. And there's clip from a podcast that I saved years ago because Jim Walmsley was trying to qualify for the 2020 trials. And I'm a big fan of his. And he was like on some podcast saying, I think marathoning might be the most difficult, or I forget exactly how to phrase it. He's basically saying the trickiest training. He's very fluid at like 100-mile trail, or that type of training comes naturally to him. Whereas he qualified for the 2020 trials with a half marathon because that was more challenging and something that just inspired him. So he was on the track with guys down in Arizona, and I was like, oh man, one of my favorite runners describing the difficulty of piecing these little systems together. Similar to yourself, like running 100 miles blows most of our minds, but you drew me in with, as my friend likes to say, without a goal, you can't score. And so you were like, I'm going for records. And I'm like, okay, now I'm interested because he could fail. And with failure as a potential, then I'm intrigued. Whereas I really try to stay positive as people tell their stories, but I quickly sort in my mind whether the thing someone's going after has limiting factors that would define success or failure. Like a lot of people nowadays take on challenges that are not easy, quote unquote, or by definition. But if, say, they could take another day or 2 or 3 to complete that challenge and it would just be more content, then I'm like, all right, that's fine. I wish that person luck, but it's different than I'm going to try to break 2:10, or I'm going to try to run 100 miles at a pace that is right at the edge of my ability. I'm like, ooh, how are you going to do that? What are you going to get after? So yeah, like marathoning, the amount of mileage people run is, I always say, you need to run as much mileage as you can. Now, the you can part is is the key, because it really breaks people's brains. And I'm a marathon coach. I backed into it because I don't lead with science, but the science is fairly straightforward to understand. And then the human element of people being like, why didn't this work? It should have worked. I've run 100 miles a week before. And you're like, yeah, but were you also doing the intensity that now I think we're going to try to turn that dial up? And so the need for speed work, the need for sort of threshold training, and oftentimes trying to convince people who run a few marathons to get interested in, say, a road race of a shorter distance, or even a track race. And then they ask, how am I going to do that? And then you're like, okay, let me talk to you about some hill training, some track workouts that then allow them to be like, whoa, this is a lot of systems and it's stressing my body in different ways. I'm like, oh, don't forget about lifting, because lifting, and I'm a big fan of like short, intense. I developed a lifting program with a strength coach at Nike years ago that's about 20 minutes that I do a few times a week, that more just keeps my chassis in line. So then you can stack the work on top of it. But yeah, that's why it starts to get really fun, is all these, you can't ignore any of the systems for too long. And so for Road to the Trials, I try to touch on training, but I'm hyper aware that it could get boring quickly. So I'm always listening for what are the things they're interested in that for their athletic career is the system they're working on, or like the unlock that and by approaching it that way, we often end up discussing different things with different people, because some of them are coming from just tons of mileage but haven't really done speed, so they're really trying to speed up. Other people are the NCAA athlete who's, I thought I was like a golden god because I was all American, but now the marathon is long. And so those stories of like people that we would think as superhuman suddenly hitting walls and having muscle breakdown that they had not ever experienced when they were racing like the 5K, 10K. So it's definitely fun to dig into the details with people. And I'm hyper aware as a host that we can edit it on the back end, but really, can we search for those nuggets that make this person tick, or that they're grappling with? And so it's not just like rinse and repeat. Yeah, everyone does the same thing. You're like, sure, ballpark, but yeah.
Yeah, it is one of those things where when you get into training, it's probably something where there might be some wow factor and some listener interest on the polar ends, where you get someone, oh, this guy ran 180 miles per week. Or this person got in with 60 miles a week. How did they do it? That's maybe a little bit of an eye catcher, but then the majority of people are probably going to fall more towards the middle of what we would expect, where they're hitting like right around 100 miles per week, and they're doing certain types of workouts. There may be some variance in kind of the order of operations with all of that, but it probably doesn't deviate too drastically to the degree where you're going to be able to tell that story 300 times and have people still interested in it every time.
Exactly. And that's where social media is really designed to like rapidly figure out like what's this outlier, what's this interesting story. So I'm running the highest mileage, or there's a woman, Felicia, who we haven't interviewed yet, but she qualified at New York, and she has put a lot of content out about running about 60 miles a week and doing tons of cross training. And then because she's an outlier, now she's a former like very good swimmer. Okay, her aerobic system is like very elite, and then she's pairing it with cross training that I'll have to learn more from afar. I'm able to see, okay, so she's now getting strong through like lots of elliptical, lots of stair climber, so muscle resiliency. But man, she's then able to make a ton of content. The haters coming out of the woodwork and being like, this can't be true, or you're lying about this. And she's probably not lying about her training, but she's also probably, it's easy for certain people to yada over. I don't inherently know what a good swimming athlete is capable of on the roads. And so there's a margin there she's playing well off of, which is she's a very good athlete. And you can tell the story that she's pretty new to it, and she's just like approaching it in a certain way. And you're like, yeah, but she's sitting on a reservoir of aerobic capacity. Yeah, I think these things are like the outliers and the different ways of approaching are fascinating. But again, it has a central through line for me because they are really trying to they have hit this threshold that's empirically like, it's just set statistically to be very difficult. For the women, for those following like 2 cycles ago, the qualifier was a 2:45 marathon, 6:15 pace. And like 450 women made it. It was this like big celebration. And then a few years later, they were like, actually, we're going to lower that to 2:37. And there was a lot of shock. That's a 6 flat pace is really, or 5:59s are really intense. But sure enough, like a bunch of women qualified, and we're on pace now in this next cycle. We still have 2 years to go for quite a few women to qualify, because there's a lot of inspiration out there. There's a lot of information. So the shoes, the drinks, the collective pack running, there's a lot of explanations for it. But as the bar raises, like people are stepping up to it. I will say, for me and my friends who've run, one buddy's run 2:17, some friends have run 2:18, I've run 2:19. When they moved the standard to 2:16, I was like, thank you, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go home. And I just think it's fascinating. Maybe you could talk about this in relation to some of the events you do. It just sounds like more numbers to people. They're just like, I don't know, man, 2:16. I'm like, okay, when they moved it from 2:19 to 2:18 for the 24 trials, I spent about a year and a half going like, maybe that's only 62 seconds faster than I've run. Mm-hmm. Turned out, for any number of reasons with my life, I was unable to harness that same fitness, let alone more fitness. But it's just that when you start to plateau and the work can compound, but the incremental gains get really small, and you're assuming you're going to have another great day. It's, for a lot of people, it's like inputs and the output will just be a PR. And you're like, what about the good weather day? What about not getting injured in the 6 weeks before? What about life just cooperating such that you're not ill on the day? When it went from 2:19 to 2:18, I spent about a year and a half trying and just wasn't able to harness the fitness. And then they moved it 2 minutes down. And I like to say to people, I ran, let's say, 4 marathon attempts where I was trying to get in that realm. And there was only about 3 miles amongst, I think, let's call it 100 miles that I ran. There was only about 3 of them that were at 5:11 pace or faster. And that's what you have to average to run under 5:16. 2:16 is 5:11s. And I was like, so I have never proven to myself that I could harness enough oxygen and flow to sustain that for an hour, let alone 2 hours, 2 hours plus. So it's just fascinating, because that can sound like being a hater to yourself, or it can sound like
just work harder, Peter.
Yeah, just work harder. And I'm like, so I came up with an analogy about this, because this idea of hard work, I've really struggled with, and we'll get into it. It like wasn't making this mantra online, like, of hard work, wasn't really computing in my brain. And then I realized it's because everyone I was around when I was training was working super hard. Like then you interview trials qualifiers, and certainly some of them still have capacity where they hope to improve in the next 2 years. But my son is big into like Minecraft and Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, these are players where if you looked at their attributes, their hard working skill is maxed out. They're just not, there's no more hard work capacity that they then need to work on the other things. They're by no means perfect athletes, but you're just like, oh, maybe for some people, particularly like newer runners, people who are like we have such an amazing wave of new runners post pandemic. They're like, their minds are getting opened up to how much this sport can consume you, which I'm super into. But because then, sorry, let me say, harder work does not always equal better performance. And I learned that the hard way in college by burning myself out season after season and really being upset about it. I'm writing a book about the marathon, and it just is as simple as in college. I thought if I really wanted it, it would lead to success. And that led to, you can't want it more when your left calf is like totally shredded, or like your hip is off. And so then your gait is not aligned. And so then you're losing X% of efficiency per mile. And suddenly I was like, oh, I thought my intent was true. My heart was pure and I wanted it. And sure, maybe we have better science and technology and understanding of the systems nowadays, but I'm like, oh, wow, wanting it was never the issue. It was balancing wanting it with overdoing it. And that's what I see with a lot of the athletes I coach is like being like, oh, I need to hold you back. You want to go run more and more. Or you're like, if I could do 3 workouts a week, could I do 4? And you're like, the question is, can you do just as much work as is sustainable right on that edge? And there were times when I was training where I was like, this is not sustainable. I am existing in this zone, being like out exposed on a cliff where you're like, I need to watch every step I take. And it's not like I'm going to camp out here for the foreseeable future. I could like tiptoe across and then hopefully stay in that zone for a little while. And the pros talk about that. Eliud Kipchoge talks about like how focused he gets in the 6 weeks before. Shalane Flanagan used to talk about even her weight and like how her body composition was like, would hover in this zone where it really wasn't sustainable, but that's what the edge training brought her to. So I find it all fascinating because it's not so straightforward. It's a balance of things.
Just a quick reminder, Training Peaks is one of the best tools for monitoring your training progress and my go-to tool when coaching individuals. At Training Peaks, you can get deep into the data, assess training load, recovery, and easily monitor progress across all training intensities. It is a perfect example of a program that takes much of the guesswork out of your training and coaching experience. I really love assessing intervals on Training Peaks. One of the first things I'll do when I get back from a run is I'll hop onto Training Peaks, unpack all that data, and just see how each of those individual intervals went and really dive into where I could maybe improve in the future. So if you're interested in getting deeper into your own training data, head over to trainingpeaks.com/HPO podcast.
Absolutely. And I think it also highlights just like hard work applied correctly can take you to your logical conclusion genetically. And then there's going to be that component too, where I think a lot of times when we see some of the new people coming into running that kind of take the hard work philosophy, they assume like hard work is all that's required. That's the only ingredient to success. And it's a big ingredient, but there is a reason why if Kipchoge ran 40 miles per week, he could probably still beat most marathoners.
Yeah.
And when you get this scenario where you get someone like that or Chittim or any of these top tier world-class marathoners, is they are this scenario where you get this perfect recipe of they applied the hard work consistently over time. They got probably a little bit lucky just because they didn't have anything crazy come up and get an injury or something that sidelined them for a long period of time. And then they also just have all the genetic, their running economy is great. Their VO2 max potential is high, and it just, everything lines up for them. I always go to the extremes to kind of show this point. It's if we took like LeBron James and put him on the most rigorous marathon training program, there is a limit where he wouldn't be able to get past. And it is quite a bit slower than Chittim's world record. Yeah. And that's just the way it is. Just if I took Kipchoge and just started training him like an offensive lineman, there's no world in which he's starting for any Division I program. No world. So these are just like, that just tells us like there are going to be genetic limitations. And I think when we move away from the extremes, that becomes something that's more worth testing than saying, let's see if we can get LeBron James to run a 2:01 marathon. That's probably not worth testing.
No.
If that's our only goal and he's not interested in doing it. But it brings up like something we talked about a little bit too, which is one thing that kind of put a spotlight on all of this was when Truett Haynes, he's a great example of this. He's a person who has always been into health and fitness, but went almost the opposite direction to a large degree of what you would expect a runner or marathoner to do for a good chunk of his life. And then decided after he had exhausted his interest in certain areas maybe and was looking for a new challenge, decided, hey, maybe I should explore what I can do as a runner. And I think he surprised a lot of people with how fast he got in the last year. And rather than just saying, you know what, that sub 230 I ran at CIM, that 225 I ran on that downhill course, I showed all you because I predicted sub 230, I'm going to move on to another target. He decided to double down and say, all right, now the next goal is Olympic trials.
I'm like, oh, here we go.
Let's go. Yeah. And I think that brings up, I think maybe topic one with that is, which is one of the reasons why you're probably the perfect person to talk to this about, is like, you started out your first marathon of 3:07, you worked that down to a 2:19:02. That's a huge amount of time. And it is one of those things where I'm sure early on you probably felt like, if I apply more of this, I get an equal return on that investment in improvement of my time. And then you get to a point where you've done all those things. You've been working hard. And now you're chiseling away at like fractions of a percentage and hoping you get good weather, because that could be the determining factor between a PR or not a PR. And you start getting into that. So like the big question then becomes, I think, or the debate is, has Truett hit that point in his trajectory where we should start seeing a plateauing and he's going to have to work just as hard to get 2 seconds versus 2 minutes? And is that ramp enough to if he isn't there yet, is the difference between 229 and 216 such that he can or can't do it? And that's where the debates and the endless online arguments begin.
Yeah, that's the thing where it's like, there's the question, like, can a man who's relatively new to full-time running, who's run 229, run under 216? And then there's the like pomp and circumstance around it. There's the bravado with which he speaks. One thing I will say is I definitely respect both what Truett and Cam, his dad, have done with their exploits. They're Oregonians, I'm an Oregonian. And what I appreciate is, I always say, I'm just like a skinny runner dude. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and have my own view on things. And not everyone's going to have that view. I have friends who grew up closer to the sort of like the hunting culture, the like blue collar Oregonian, and they're like, man, you got to understand, like, being a skinny runner dude is not popular in some of these environments. And so I have tried to be increasingly open-minded to, I'll see visuals and words that I'm like, that's not for me. And then I'm like, you know what, if that's how they approach this sport of running and they're bringing people in and inspiring people to run, like, I'm all for it. Even if initially I had a friend who is loosely connected to their world, and he grew up in Eastern Oregon. And he's, man, like, we just wanted to, growing up, we wanted to show how tough we were. Because I loved running, but I needed to talk about it in a way of it's staring down failure and being tough about it. Whereas I approached it from, toughness was assumed. Like, it's just, running is so hard. Even when it was the 3K in high school and then the 5K and 10K in college, like, to me, toughness burns off pretty well and good by an hour and a half into a marathon. And so then it's more, how I approach it and how I've written about it is more like this tranquil, like harnessing like your most positive, like jamming your system with positivity such that you still believe in yourself, like for the next step and for the next step and for the next step. So Yeah, you've been kind enough to mention like the 307 where I like didn't really know what I was doing fueling wise, and I definitely got like super blurry eyed and was like coming through. When I started to get a little faster, someone shrewdly on one of the message boards years ago was like, "Hey, that 307 was like a shitty outlier." He had run like low 15-minute 5Ks in college, and he was more probably capable of a 235 or whatever. So like a lot of runners, it looks sexy online on social media to say like, how slow can I have gone so I can cut off 2 hours? And you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, but that's a scientist would have a better term for this. But that's like the low end of your capacity. So Truett ran some much slower marathon a couple years ago, just like totally untrained. And to me, that's like good on him for doing it, but it's not indicative of anything. So going from 4 hours to 3 hours for him as a genetically talented, strong person, he's a world record holder in pull-ups.
Right.
So you're like, this guy is just a ball of muscle and ability, and also just like stare down very difficult tasks. I don't know a lot about pull-ups or like the training necessary for that. What I would say is I welcome that my buddy who is like a bow hunter and owns many guns was like, "What's up, man? Do you think Truett Haynes can run the trial center?" I was like, "What do you know about this?" It came across my social media. I was like, "Okay, that's fun." Like, I'm running a whole podcast about the trials, and this friend has never asked me about the trials because he has no relation to it. It's just these skinny, fast people in his mind. Whereas, yeah, someone who breaks 230 is and still is stepping into it. You posted about it, and my question that I commented was, I'll be interested. I'll be very impressed if he sticks with it for a full year, let alone the 2 years left in the window. And that I really on social media try to stick to like things that I mean and that maybe push the conversation, but are not intended as snark, and they're not intended to dunk on anyone. At the time, I was like, who is this guy? I'd heard of Truett, but I not in relation to the OTQ. And a few people commented back, "You have no idea how hard he's willing to work." And I'm like, okay, man, like the beauty is, and this is what I come back to always, is you could try to shit talk running all you want. And I am like, have at it. Just run your mouth endlessly. Running, the clock does not care. It just doesn't matter. Like, I grew up a soccer player and we would like talk shit and try to get in each other's heads. And I loved that side of the sport. But like, running doesn't care about your shit talk. And so I am, if it fires them up and keeps people going, like by all means. At the same time, I'm a little bit, I'm slightly adverse, I will say, to the haters don't believe I can do it, like us versus them. I just think I really would love, and it's not going to be for everyone in our like divisive culture these days, like to avoid some of the like conflict around these pursuits. Because what I saw as a OTQ chaser was like, we would try to compete in the final 10K. We would be like, but only as like a mechanism to get ourselves to just run as fast as possible. But for the first 20 miles, it was just like teamwork. We're just like, hey man, like if you'd been there, I would have been like, hey, do you want any of this drink? And you'd be like, no, I'm good. And then there was any number of times where I bumped into someone and I'm like, sorry. And they're like, no, man, it's going both ways, because we were trying to run as this really tight pack. And those were the things that I find endlessly inspiring. Was like, I found it first time in Chicago when I tried to run 6-minute pace, and I found the 6-minute pace of men from around the world. And we were just like moving as a mass of humanity together.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw it trying to break 230 in Boston. You would just see the pack and I'd be like, those are my guys. And we'd zip together, and like I would lead some, they'd lead some. And you end up having relationships with people that you might not really be close friends, but you've like really worked at a goal together in this intense way. And I still stay in touch with some men who've stopped running, and also some men who are like 214 marathoners now. And I'm like, man, like you're the man. Like I'm just like my whole heart cheering for them, because it's not an us versus them when we're trying to get the most out of ourselves.
Yeah, it's funny to me because now with online stuff, it feels like a lot of the us versus them, or even like the animosity, is not Truett or the person who's trying to critically examine his potential. It's all the kind of, I guess, almost, I don't want to say uninformed, but just like passion that comes with it. Because it's like, the funny thing is like, these conversations always fascinate me, because I'm trying to think like, okay, there's a reason this person is thinking this way, and it's probably makes sense if I could put myself in their shoes, but they don't know what they don't know. So
Yeah.
with Truett, it's like someone comes in and says, you don't know how hard he works, to you, who you know how hard you know what it takes, right? So like, I think of that, I'm like, okay, I actually see that as a possible like disadvantage for him reaching that goal, because I do know how hard Truett works, and I know that's not new. I know that's not something he's just turning on this year. So he's already pulled that lever to some degree. It almost would be better from a potential standpoint if he was like, you know what, I really haven't tried yet. Now it's time to start trying. I'd be like, oh, okay, let's see what this guy can do now.
And you gotta know those guys, right? Like the ones who you're like, wait, he ran 222 and he was running like 4 to 5 days a week.
Yeah.
What? I mean, so that's where the numbers get lost on a lot of people who are newer to running, which I totally respect. Is it's not, if you run a 222 marathon, you're quite quick and you're totally anonymous to the sport. But if you're around the sport long enough, you people are always like, oh, he's a freak, or he said he took most of the winter off, but now he's already doing tempo runs with us. And you're just like, oh my Lord, we've known the guys who like can't seem to either stay healthy, which is a huge thing. Maybe first it's A, B, and C on the list, stay healthy. And then there are guys who I'm sure you've trained with them where you're like, oh, his inspiration wanes. Like it comes and it goes. And those are the guys you're like, man, I wish I could lend him some of my passion for this. So yeah, no, if someone wants to cut off a lot of time, it'd be great if they were eating horribly, or if my question to Truett would be how, in one vector would be like, how skinny are you willing to be? You're used to being this totally jacked dude that the world really admires, and we're going to have to lose. You can't be dragging around all that muscle mass if you want the efficiency at 5:11 pace. Yeah, and I think the working hard, I'm not sure the type of people you've trained with. I just have a list of men. My buddy Johnny, who's a 217 marathoner, he has not run under 216. He ran at the last trial. He ran his last 2 trials. He does work at Nike and has a son, but he runs 10 plus in the morning and he runs 4 plus in the afternoon every damn day. And so you're like, I don't think you're going to outwork Johnny. I just don't. It doesn't really feel like the capacity. Now, is there ways of getting faster than he is potentially? And I've looked at some of the content Truett's put out around, he knows this endeavor will require him to get faster. And speed is, it's like a tricky mistress, because you can like do some of it and it can pay off, and then you can do some more and suddenly your calf is pissed off, or you're like, why? Why? I didn't do that much more than I did last cycle. And you're like, the body is not a machine. It's like a series of softer things. So I think I like how you're dissecting it. Like there's these different variables, and which ones could he pull more of? Or could anyone who says, I'm going to stare down a big goal? And what I will say is, I appreciate that Truett has put a goal that he could fail at, because there are a lot of people who make content who pick things that, again, don't really have a crisp definition. And so then they can just hide the ball and be like, yay, I succeeded. And you're like, what even was that? Whereas this is definitely a crisp definition. My curiosity was like how he'll approach improvement, because we talked to every runner wants to improve. Like I interview 214 marathoners and they just really want to be 209 marathoners. And so then it's like, how mentally and physically are they going to think about training at faster paces, taking on more work, going out at races a little bit faster? I always say, when they announced 216, I was just so thankful I existed in a period. My peak fitness overlapped with a period where the qualifier was 219. And so I got to go out with the pack and be a part of that experience. Because if it had been 216, I would have been a 223 marathoner at this point in my life. And I would have been like, it's
a big jump.
I just ran. Yeah. If you run 530s, you just can't head out and run 511s. It's not how it works. So then you have to create a group of people who also want to go to this race and run, let's say 520s, somewhere in that. Like that would be but I also got to witness the guys who jumped on the OGQ pack who weren't prepared for it, and be like, I've written about how I very mentally prepared for the first 6 to 7 miles to be very chaotic, because there would be a lot of men who are like, I'm going to see how long I can last on this train. And so there was a lot of human bodies like very close to me. And I think to my great benefit had visualized, I'm going to have to be very calm. It might be difficult to get over to the bottle stations because it's going to be a lot of people who are very excited and they're going to be like gasping for air. And sure enough, like they were just like, and so that I would use that as a positive reinforcement cycle of my breathing is calm. Can I breathe even calmer? Can I slow my heart rate even more, even as we're clipping along? Because we're in the first hour of a 2 hour and 19-minute race. These guys aren't going to be there like in the second hour, let alone the third hour.
Right.
And they weren't. So it's how do you like set yourself up for those incremental gains? Because you can't just, one approach might be like just go out with the 216 pack at multiple races, but that's a really tough way to live, like psychologically and physically.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting science experiment. It'll be fun to see what Truett does. I know he definitely is. Like the thing I found kind of funny about it too was just some of the commentary I thought was really good. And some of it I thought was ridiculous, where it was like one was like, oh, he's just doing this for clicks. That's the one that I was just like, that kind of showed me like, oh, you really haven't really been following who this guy is. If you think that's the case. No, don't get me wrong. I think Truett knows putting a big goal out there and going after these challenges and a document is going to get clicks, and getting clicks is the business he's in. Yeah. But I don't think he's looking at it through the lens of, I'm going to do this because it's going to get me more clicks, because I think he's going to get more clicks almost no matter what he does. And he could get just as many clicks by doing something that would maybe be a little bit more approachable than what he put out there, the target. Like he doesn't need to put a 216 marathon. In fact, I actually think if I were Truett, if my number one goal was to get clicks, I would have probably been like, all right, I've run this running thing to its logical conclusion. I met my goal of breaking 230. I proved the haters wrong. Here's my middle finger. Now I'm going to do this. Who knows what? Maybe it's the sub 5 mile and 500-pound deadlift challenge or whatever.
Oh, that thing is crazy.
Yeah. There's just dozens and dozens of different fitness challenges and his community, it's not like his community is, I think sometimes people look at this through the lens of they're like, oh, he is engaging with the running community now, therefore he should be serving us. When in reality, Truett's community is massively broad, and running is part of what they do or what they pay attention to. And some of them don't really pay attention to running at all other than him. So like he's literally their inroad to running. Yeah. To me, I think that's just something like if he wanted to just amass clicks and keep that train going, he would have picked something totally different. But
he definitely loves running. It just seems like he loves running, which is, I see it in little things. Again, I'm always hyper obsessed on these like little details people say. And I'm like, dude, this guy loves running. Like he wouldn't be doing this. And social media can get weird in terms of like, these straw men get built where someone's like, this is disrespecting the OTQ. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? It's a way of saying that person doesn't think he'll succeed. But I'm like, dude, the OTQ does not need his respect or if he was mouthing off that it was too easy, I'd be like, that guy's just wrong. Okay. But there's no such thing as disrespecting the time. Like it's just being like rude to other people online is disrespect. But saying, I'm going to shoot for this time. If anything, I've talked to you about my progression. When I broke 230, it was such this like big, sexy number. It's 9,000 seconds. Like I wrote a whole essay about it and people really enjoy it. And I wrote another essay a year later called Why Faster, where I was grappling with these numbers start to be a little meaningless. And I was very sad about that. I was like, I could almost see, maybe I'm mapping my experience onto Trill. You break 230 and you go, shoot, I really enjoyed this running thing. What's next that's like big and sexy and I can go after? I think the thing that social media will always frame things a little bit hyperbolic. Like it's sub 230 or death. You're like, you're just not going to die.
Right. Yeah.
Flat out, you're like, I'm like, if he talked to his buddies, I know he's connected to the types of people who run Badwater. I'm like, watch yourself.
Yeah.
That could really
you might die there.
Yeah, you could definitely die there. And I want you to be very careful. Whereas I'm like, if you go out really hard at CIM, the heartbreaking cruelty is you just slow down. It's just like, I am not moving. And I've written about how like when I was running 5:15, 5:17 pace, when I started running like 5:22 pace, like I was still moving really fast, and it was super frustrating. And I'm like, I'm moving. It wasn't like when I hit the wall running 307 or fading dramatically. You're like, man, oh man, I'm taking splits on my watch and I'm just moving 5 seconds a mile too slowly. There's no death, thankfully. I watched around that time Free Solo came out, and I said to my wife, like, aren't you glad I pushed myself in stuff that like was safer? So I think you're right about the clicks could have come from something else. And if anything, I worry about a lot of our YouTubers because I'm like, it requires such fresh content cycle. Ali Ostrander is someone who I totally admire, and yet I see how frequently she comes up with a new hook of something she's working on, and I'm like, oh gosh, Ali, I wish I could just give you like 3 months of not having to put out content and just put your head down and train. Because she'll be like, I'm trying hill strides now, and you're like, what if your training was working? You just stuck with it longer. So I will be very impressed if Truett, I think he can find a way to make content in different ways, but if he has any shot of running, say, sub 220, it's going to take work and it's going to take time. And I don't always think time plays well on social media for the content hype cycle.
Just a quick reminder that Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte source. I know that I lose 614 milligrams of electrolytes for every liter of sweat. So on those training sessions, especially the hot days, I'll make sure I have a packet of one of their multiple flavors in with my fluids. Or if I'm looking for a refreshing post-workout beverage or just staying on top of electrolytes throughout the day, I will often lean to their cans of Element Sparkle, which are a very tasty treat after a hot training run. If you want to get a free sample pack with your next purchase, head over to drinklmnt.com/HPO.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things where this is realistically, if Truett has a 216 or faster in him, if we're looking at just the odds are it's going to take more than 1 year to get there. Yeah. If we look at just a normal like kind of growth curve and how that sort of plateaus and you inch and crawl your way forward at a certain point. And that's actually one of the reasons why I was like suspicious of the commentary around he's doing it for clicks, because I think he knows that, look, I think he picked that goal because he knows it's scary and aggressive. And I think that's the same reason why he tried to do 10,000 pull-ups, because he knew it was like, I could fail epically by this, and there will be people that criticize me for it and talk about it for however long they want to, and I have no control over that. So to me, I think that almost like when he put the 216 goal out there, to me, that said, you're actually invested in running. You're actually very interested in seeing where is the logical conclusion to me as a runner. And like maybe that comes from just, I know his dad told him early on, you're a runner, when he went into different sports and things like that, and just said, this would be a great sport for you. But he was young. Kids do what they want to do, and they're not going to necessarily deal with the rigors of a sport that they don't enjoy for too long. Sure. So yeah, he went a different direction. And I think maybe he thinks about that. Okay, there were signs that I could have been a good runner. I was a small kid and it took a lot of work to get big. So maybe had I been a runner, I would have stayed smaller and been really fast. And then I'd be looking at an Olympic trials qualifier right now, already in the bag. And yeah, I think it's a question he has that he really wants to answer. He wants to know, like, when I put myself entirely into this process, what comes out of it. So if he does get to the end of this year without 216 on his resume, then I do wonder, does he keep trying for a few more years to see if he can keep whittling the pace down? Or does he eventually get to a point where he's like, all right, that's as fast as I can go, which you get to eventually, like everyone's going to get to that point eventually where they look at it and it was like, whatever aspirations I had was just a number I came up with. And then eventually, like, I kept trying, and then I reached the logical conclusion here where no more trying was going to get me faster. And that was what I was worth in terms of my time.
That's where we go. I'm writing this whole book about the marathon where I did not make the trials. I missed by a second and a half. They round up to 2. And then I went and tried again, like you mentioned, and came 20 seconds short. And what I have realized since the years that have passed is I got to find out how good I could be. And people like to say, oh, I do this sport to see how good I can be. But there's always this assumed I can be better. And I'm like, I don't know, man, when you run 3 marathons within 40 seconds of each other, that's a pretty good statistical data set that says that's about your limit. And sure, like on a slightly better weather day, you can always come up with some factor. I probably could have squeaked out a little bit better, but I it's easy to focus on the what maybe was missing and lose sight of how much went right. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like, and to give the book away, I grew up like not that fast, a small school, mile and 2 miler. And then I went to Division 3 school and really wanted it and broke myself all the time and just really thought I could make nationals, but didn't come close, and stepped away from it with deep insecurity around like how painful it was to really try for a goal and fail. And I came away from the experience of trying to make the trials like just very calm of I have given my all. I have nothing to prove to anyone. That's how good I am. I'm proud of how good I am, and I'm deeply like respectful of the men who are faster. And that piece was like something I didn't expect would greatly appreciate, because I
Mm-hmm.
see in a lot of my friends or like younger athletes, like they're just they got a lot to prove, and that can drive you incredibly well. It sometimes can eat you alive if you like let trying to prove to other people to search for that inner peace. But I was like, as years have passed, I'm like, man, I'm so proud of that. It stands on its own. I don't have to like shit talk it to anyone. I'm just
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's, and I am grateful that I'm grateful that everything aligned, that like the standard was in that realm. Because again, if it had been faster, maybe I just would have DNF'd at 3 races and you'd be like, how good am I? I still don't know. And yeah, have a deep appreciation for that. I also just really love running. And I went through a knee injury last year and wasn't able to run for 6 months, and I'm coming back to it like very appreciative of running. And so there's this grind culture around I run every day no matter what, that I'm like, hey man, just please don't break yourself. Like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
no fun to live a life in pain, and your body doesn't give a shit about your goals. Like it doesn't. I actually talk to a sports psych during the whole period, and she's like, I hear you saying you want to run for life, move. And I also hear you saying you want to chase like Masters American records. Those could be in conflict. And I'm like,
Yeah.
ah, shoot, you're so this idea of it, like we love movement and we love sport. And so I see certain people who put their story out and they're like, I don't know. When I really dig into it, like I have come to appreciate, for instance, like David Goggins, bless his heart, has inspired millions of people to push themselves. But there's like a coming from a sense of themselves as weak. I think a lot of people who particularly didn't grow up with sport or maybe grew up out of shape and didn't feel like they were capable, they really respond to this. No, I need to beat back the weakness
Mm-hmm.
every day. Whereas I was super fortunate to grow up a kid doing a lot of sports, and then running was part of my community. And so it's just taken me a while to appreciate like, oh, that message of beating back the inner bitch in yourself, like every day.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa. It just, I pretty quickly turned that. I was turned off by that years ago. And then I've come to appreciate how important it is for people who feel down on themselves and feel like they just want to make something of themselves. And that's awesome. Like anything that gets people doing that. Now, I caution them to please listen to the signs your body's sending you. You can't just start running an hour
Mm-hmm.
a day. You talk about this all the time.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Goggins is someone who I think he ends up being polarizing, because it's like if Goggins pulled you out of the drudges and you turned your life around, there is nobody on planet Earth who's going to tell you anything negative about him that you're going to be willing to listen to.
Yeah, I
But
know.
if you're somebody who had all that order and structure in place and you're like, okay, I'm optimizing for performance, you're going to look at that and be like, oh. And I was trying to think, where is the realness here? And you know what? I had Brad Stulberg on the podcast. He just had a book,
Mm-hmm.
The Way of Excellence, that just came out. And he framed it in a way that I really liked, where we're looking at Goggins as we're looking at him the wrong way a lot of times. And one of the things that kind of resonated with me was that like everyone has like a set of values or a value system that they, for whatever reason, have determined is something that's worth structuring their ambitions around and holding them accountable to doing certain things. And to me, I think like Goggins had a very big mismatch between his behaviors and his value system. And that's why he
Mm.
found himself in a position where he was out of shape, couldn't make it around the block and all that stuff. And I think that just destroyed his soul.
Yeah.
And eventually he got around to saying it doesn't have to be this way. And now for him, it doesn't matter if it's a 240-mile race, if it's him going into the gym and doing pull-ups or whatever happens to be. For him, it's like his value system is like showing that he can show up and do it. and continually do that. And in his words, beat back the inner bitch. And
Yeah.
for him, that's probably a life worth living. That adds the value to his life because he can go to bed at night thinking my value system is intact and I'm behaving according. Because we all know when we're diverting from our value system in our behaviors. But for someone else, that might not be their value system in the same way, in which case they don't want to just necessarily plug Goggins into their framework. They maybe want to use him as like a tool where it's, okay, there are going to be days where I know I'm physically and ready to go do this workout and I'm just being lazy and trying to avoid it. I'll throw on a Goggins and I'll just really get whipped into shape and get out the door.
And that's like useful.
Yeah. So some of this, I think like with these type of people, you have to appreciate like, where do I use them to pull a lever that I need when I need it, but maybe step away from that approach when it comes time to nurse that knee injury, or I just did a 30-mile long run and it's time to take a rest day. Maybe I don't go out and stay hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. Like I'm the first person to like own that I've lived like a very privileged life, like a very like comfortable life. And I love marathoning for the reason many people love marathoning, like it pushes you to the edge of your ability. But I've been super fortunate to not go through like true despair, whether it's like economic despair, like some people that we interview come from like homelessness and then they pull themselves out, or like I've interviewed Mitch Amons, who describes running as like saving him from, he had kicked drug addiction a little bit, but had yet to find the next thing to like really drive his life, and running in that community has really, he talks about it from an addict's perspective. I don't know how I was injured for 6 months, couldn't run. And my wife at some point said, "Oh, I see now that you're like addicted to exercise." And it's like, these terms have technical definitions, but there's also, when people are like, "Man, you're so committed, you work out every day." I'm like, listen, man, it's just not really like, I eat every day, I sleep every day. And like, no one says you're super committed for eating and sleeping. Like, I just consider movement like another thing I'm going to do every day. And because at this point, it's like so hardwired into how I feel at my best. And so, I sometimes have to, like you're saying, walk a mile in someone's shoes who they're not, in my view, fortunate to have that as part of their life. And they're just like trying to maybe find it. Different messages are going to be inspiring to that. But when the essay I wrote about the OTQ chase was called The Bubble of a Dream, because I was really like, I'm able to read it back and be like, this guy's crazy. Like, this guy was like, I was so focused and I was so driven. And all this fun experiences came out the other end as a result. But I wasn't like, I didn't spend too much time being like, how committed can I be, or how much fun can I have? I was just like, oh man, it would be so cool to achieve this dream. And so all these actions came as a result. And I think there's going to be, running is booming. There's going to be people who come at it from all these different directions. I have a buddy in New York. We'll forward each other reels that come across our social media, and we just always say there's a lot of different types of runners out there.
More now than ever.
This ain't for me. It's not for me, but it's like for someone.
Yeah. And maybe to tie your experience up a little bit with the marathon, is one thing I think is really interesting about your story too, is if I put myself in your position, I think of it as, I think I'd rather have your experience and be a second and a half off what the goal you set out to achieve, and know I gave it everything I had, and that's what the result was, versus say you run, the alternative is maybe you run 2:18:59.
Sure.
And you do the trials, and then but the backline, you're a 2:16 marathoner. That would upset me more. That would upset me more than thinking, okay, 2:19:02 or 2:19:1.5 is what I had. That's what I had. Yeah. And that, unfortunately, that's a couple seconds away from what would have given me that big gold star of Olympic trials qualifier. But I think that sits with me better than 2:18:59 and the potential of a 2:16.
And and I'm so fortunate that, again, like, I almost can't believe it that my ability level came close to this, what was the threshold that everyone was collecting around, because I ran 2:19:02 at CIM 2019, and that was just like the fastest I ever ran, and just like a lights out race. And I'm like, sure, I can find that it was like a little humid that day. If it had been like slightly less, the dew point had been lower, my body have been slightly, you can find seconds in these weird ways. But that led me to run Houston a month and a half later. And just the fact that the pack, so in this race, I go out a little bit fast. I'm like, I'm tired of just staring at the clock. I want to run like 5:15s, which I think I can do for quite a while, and set myself up with a good buffer. And I get out there and it's windy and I'm isolated. Some of my friends had gotten off to the ahead of me, and I'm just like slowing in the wind, and I'm like, this is basically over. Like maybe I'll drop out. And then I start to hear like the pitter patter of the proper OTQ pack is catching me, which again, in this world of 216, like I just would have been behind them. But this mass of humanity, including two pacers, starts to catch me. And I'm like, it's just, I can never find enough words to express how thankful I am that I got to experience this mass of humanity is catch me. And you're like, Peter, you're going to have one chance to latch.
Yep.
You get one shot. And I'm like, it's probably over. I can't do it. And I like slip in behind them, and the wind breaking helps a little bit. And I'm like, okay, but this is faster than I was just previously moving. And I'm like, just give it like a block. Just give it like a half a block. And this is in hindsight, like some of the most lights out running I've ever done. I like blacked out for 45 minutes, just making it one more left, right, left, right, left, right at a time. And then sure enough, with 3 miles to go, they started to pull away and we were going into the wind. And it's just like, you can just shit talk for endless hours of how much you want it. And you're like, now is the exact moment when you have to put up or shut up. And I gave it my all, and I still ran quite quick, but I lost 20 seconds to the standard and didn't make it that day. But that's why I know the road to the trials has a lot of stories to tell, because that was all just enveloped. It was lost in the river of a 2:19:20. Okay, fine. And you're like, no, but like, the little kid in me who like didn't think he was fast enough in high school, didn't think he was fast enough in college, I was able to do that. And I was able to hang on for 45 minutes when I was like, every stride I didn't think I was tough enough or could hang on. Like, I'm just like in awe. And it was all because I was just focused on the goal. I wasn't thinking about myself. I was just like lost in the moment. And that's what made it so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a phenomenal story. And I think it just lends you to be the guy for the job when it comes to a podcast that talks about the road to the trials and interviews these individuals. I think it's going to be fun as you can continue to roll those out there.
Just a quick reminder that Delta G ketones is my go-to exogenous ketone source. I will take these after my big training sessions, as well as during my long runs at lower intensity and longer races at lower intensity. You can get 20% off your next purchase by going to deltagketones.com and entering promo code BITTER20.
I did have one other topic, if you don't mind sticking around a little bit longer. I don't want to keep you if you got a hard hour.
No, I got time.
Okay, cool. The other thing that's changed or shifted a lot in the last few years, and probably even after you were really in the thick of it, is we have basically from pandemic onward, we've had such an influx of new runners into the sport, and it would be wrong to say that isn't due to new people being drawn in by new people, is the way I look at it. Because it, like, historically was one of these things where when new people enter the sport, it was because people who were embedded in the sport brought them in, and then it grew from there. And that's like a slow process. I would say, like, during the pandemic, we got these like kind of pandemic runners who evolved into influencers. And these influencers were both new to the sport, but also carried the extra benefit or skill set of drawing in a whole host of other new runners, where in the past it wouldn't have been someone new doing that in most cases, outside of maybe like I guess maybe I'm wrong about that to some degree. You'd always have the scenario where like Oprah Winfrey runs the Chicago Marathon. Now a ton of people are running. Oprah wasn't someone who just became a runner and just started talking nothing about running at that point. She went back to her normal gig. Whereas the influencers, they build a whole world around the aspect of running, bringing in these new people. So now we have this kind of new leverage point of potential to draw in new runners. We've got this new point of kind of personal branded almost media that is telling stories, giving advice, showing what they're doing, and influencing not just by, oh yeah, I use this gel, and then they get paid and someone buys the gel, but also this is how I train, or this is how you go from a 240 to a 220 or a 330 to a 310. And they show that process. And it's one of those things where I try to look at these as you're never going to get anything that is all good. And you're probably also, so you, especially when it grows fast, things that come fast and big are going to carry in some unforeseen or unintended consequences, or things that we maybe can focus on or should focus on to some degree, but we also have to be mindful of not maybe focusing on them to such a degree that we throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is the running community is getting bigger, more people interested in just health and fitness, finding ways to move their body where they otherwise maybe wouldn't. Or in some cases, people who, I hate the idea of someone thinking I can't be a runner and just never trying it. And I think influencers bring those people in. Like they bring those people in because they're so much more relatable in a lot of cases, because sometimes they're where they're at because they had a story of I can't do this. And then they're literally showing you can. And if you're that person, you see some 210 marathoner, you might think, yeah, but that person was running since middle school. They competed D1, and then I can't. They're
what's it have to do with me? Yeah.
And even something as simple as just the way the person looks. So like you get someone who maybe doesn't fit that like runner's mold, that skinny runner mold, who is now all of a sudden going out and running marathons. Maybe someone who also thought I can't be a runner, I don't look like that, is wait a second, they're doing it. And then it creates, it breaks down some of these artificial barriers. So like I said a lot there, but it's one of those things where we also have the scenario where an opportunity like that comes with financial gain, where you have a situation now where I think influencers in a lot of cases are probably monetizing the sport better than a lot of athletes are. So you get this tension point of, is there this finite pie of sponsorship packages that are now going to influencers instead of athletes? I think that's one of the things that kind of cleans itself up a little bit with growth, because with growth becomes, you get the pie gets bigger too. And if they're making the pie bigger, but I think the one that kind of gets a little bit more messy in some cases is, are these stories they're telling authentic enough that it's going to actually guide people to be able to do the things they're trying to do? With elite athletes, obviously we don't have an amazing system when it comes to like performance enhancing. There's obviously pro athletes out there who are getting away with cheating and therefore stealing from the sport, so to speak. But there is a system there. With influencers, there's really no system there. So, you know, you get into the world of like more influencers that are more like in line with performance versus just doing the sport. Now we kind of have to ask ourselves the question, is that an authentic thing they're leading people on? Are they being transparent around what they're actually doing? And that goes outside of performance enhancers too. It could even just be like the way they're training and things like that.
So like, definitely muddied.
Do we need guardrails, or are there guardrails we could even put in place realistically that would help keep that side of things maybe as pure as we can expect it to be?
That's what I like to your point about, can we keep growing this pie? I put up a thing around, I'm a 9-time finisher of the Boston Marathon. I've run it as a charity runner, an open field runner, a elite start runner. I love the race. I love coaching people to the race. And I got a little irked last year where I was like, people are using this stage that I adore. Boston has all sorts of things that's wrong with it. And like Boston is the city. There's a lot of history. Fine. But I think it's wonderful that it's like the amateur Olympics of marathoning. And then I saw these content creators really like shooting commercials during the race. Like they're like very choreographed. I will do this and then you'll stand there and then I'll finish. I'll come over to you and I'll be like, let's go to Raising Cane's for our cool down meal. Really high production value. And I'm like, what is going on? And I get that their time, this is where numbers get really squishy because the time doesn't really matter. Truthfully, they were probably thinking as much about running a fine time while still like making sure they looked presentable. Like they're not going to be like passed out on the street. You can't shoot your commercial at the end of the race. It's just, I'm like, what am I looking at? And talking to a friend, she was like, I posted on a reel, hey, I really love the Boston Marathon because in my view, everyone shows up and throws down. And on that day, you just get to see where you land. There's a lot of races that aren't like that. And this is one of them, not the only one that people, they literally line you up by like your qualifying time based on your bib number. And then you can try to compete, which I think is beautiful. And I'm a big fan of people. I would say I am here for athletes trying to perform. And that can be at breaking 220, 230, 3 hours, 4 hours. Like I coach people who are like chipping away at trying to break the 4-hour barrier, but they're of the similar mindset of trying to love that marathon lifestyle. Whereas, yeah, because the numbers are so squishy, I've seen people who are like, I'm a 2:45 marathoner. Let me tell you how it works. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, people don't necessarily realize that for any number of fit men who have done other sports and are like fit enough, like a 2:45 is both like thumbs up, and it's also not that hard. It doesn't mean that they like cracked the code. It doesn't mean they like really even know why they did it. They like, so there's all these people, yeah, like selling stuff. This is where you see it online, like the worlds start to touch. Like you can click a few clicks and you go from running to like fitness to, I mean, neither of us really want to talk about sort of make America healthy again movement, the like selling stuff where you're like, oh, so yeah, you have capitalism like just applying itself on top of our sport, and you're like, some of this is new and additional. Yeah, I worry about some of if budgets for pro runners start to get cut. Hopefully, like you're saying, the whole sport gets bigger. We're selling more running shoes and there's more funds available. With the introduction of NIL and high schoolers getting sponsored, we're like, man, there's definitely going to be some like 212 marathoners who don't get a contract because there's this kid who's the future, and we always love youth and for potential. So the money's going to pull from different directions. I would say NIL is a different bucket than like content creator. But yeah, it's like when you're talking to Peter at my most centered, I'm like, hey, if this person is, say, like over 250 pounds and looks like a new runner, like that's going to just visually appeal to a different type of person and be accessible for a different type of runner. I've, for instance, like in this space is someone like Nick Bear, who is just a big yoked dude who's told his story for a decade now. And what I appreciate about Nick is that he has said, again, certain things in certain videos where I'm like, that guy is when he chooses to be, he's a real runner. Like he's really trying to do he loves the sport, and he's not just trying to fly by night and make a buck off of our sport. I think I get more irked by people. I'm like, are you even, I had a friend say, they're just visitors, man. They're going to pass through and like they won't be running in 2 years. But I really do appreciate that Nick he appeals to certain runners who maybe they do come from the gym culture and they're like, man, being a runner's lame. But they're like, Nick does it, and he talks about it in a way that's different than the Peters and Zachs of the world. And so maybe I could run a marathon or get after a half marathon. And the older I get, the more I look at like what's the incentive structure here, and like how are they making their money? Like trying to sell you on, I broke 3 hours, therefore sign up for my AI training plan. I'm like, oh, this feels a little gross. Whereas
right.
Nick is, you can feel differently about different products and his whole brand and his whole company. But I'm like, he's selling like supplements that people could take. I do think around the drug testing thing you just mentioned, that there is now precedent because of the way drug testing works, and it's always, we've known it's been behind the people pushing the boundaries, that Sawe, who's sponsored by Adidas, has taken on his own testing protocol in addition to being part of the World Athletics sport protocol, to say, I want to really prove and have more evidence than even like the random drug testing. Like he's submitting himself to random drug tests. You can Google it. That I wonder if it'll be, I don't know where this would come from, but like the chorus of athletes say to certain athletes, like, hey, we know you've improved a ton, but could you pass a drug test? Could it be like this, like democratized way of saying, I'm willing to be more transparent in how I progressed? Or does the people not particularly care? But I will say, as a coach and as a empathetic person for other runners, I hope that they are getting information from good sources, not just the random person that they come across on YouTube. But we're also in an era, I'm surrounded by books that like describe training theory, and I'm like, a lot of that stuff has made its way out into the world, and people find decent workouts, and there's a lot more knowledge out there than when I got into running like 20-30 years ago. So it's like a weird culture of, it's good that people are moving. I try to mute people who I feel like I'm like, I just don't need to see this person. But I worry about the newer runner, the like less personally secure runner, or the person who knows less. I wouldn't want them to chase something that's either chemically enhanced or that's not actually being truthful. That would be icky.
Yeah. You said a lot of interesting things there. I think, with Nick, the one thing I really like about the way he's approached it is he's avoided this scenario of, all right, I'm coming to this sport and I've got this new edgy way to do it. Like, he has been pretty upfront about, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm here to learn. I'm going to hire a professional that's going to give me the program, and I'm going to show you how I'm doing it. I'm going to give you all that. I get up in the morning, I follow my routine, I do this workout, I set this goal, and that's what people are looking for from him. They're not looking for him necessarily to, I'm sure people would if he did, but like, he's draw a line in the sand. I'm not going to come at you as the authority in the sport. I'm going to come at you as a disciple. And here's the person I chose to help lead me, and this person knows their shit. So
I categorize people online into two camps, like you said. One where they're like, running is bigger than me. There will always be something I don't know, and I love the process. I definitely consider myself that. Like, running's broken me so many times, and I'm just like, man, this is a beautiful pursuit that will never end. Versus the like voices that are like, they act like they're above running. They're like, they speak as though, I've cased the joint, I know how it works, I'll show you, and it's pretty simple. And I'm like, that's just incorrect. And so what are they hiding, or why are they? And there's just always more to learn, even for something that's relatively simple. I did send Jeff Cunningham, is a friend of mine and has been Nick's coach when Nick has been focused on running. And I sent him one video where I was like, why is Nick talking about 5 by mile on the road as his speed work? And Jeff's, oh man, like, a lot of guys do that. 5 by mile is just not speed work, but it is, they call anything faster than, say, marathon pace speed work, because it kind of elevates their capacity to go faster. So it's not very precise, but it's not like malicious. So we're going to get after something on a Wednesday morning that is going to improve our capacity to do this thing we love. And you're like, okay, it's not like you might, and like you said, Nick's not let me be your coach and I guarantee I can unlock results. That's where we get into this different cycle that's separate. So yeah, I think there's a lot of people, I'm just like dumbfounded by how exhausting it would be to be like constantly need, again, this like next thing that I can make a video about this month to then keep the eyeballs. That's where, and I'm not that successful at it, to be totally honest. I don't have that many followers, and I don't, like, there are people who play this game so much better, and I'm like, I just don't know how much that plays to being a marathoner.
And it is one of those things too, where I know enough content creators and influencers that I see what they do on a day-to-day basis, where I'll see posts online sometimes where it's, oh yeah, must be great for you. You can sit around and train like a professional athlete all day long and just live off that big Instagram following. That Instagram account didn't get there because they got accidentally viral once, and then everyone decided to stick around and pay attention to nonsense. That Instagram account is big because they're probably spending a full week's worth of work coming up with ideas, getting the production put together, and doing all the things that kind of, and it's getting more and more as like the competition heats up, because people are realizing, hey, there's a job here and that looks better than my job. So maybe I should try. But I think when they get down into the thick of it, like the real successful content creators are oftentimes working full time, producing that content, making that content, and doing those sort of things, just like building a business that you would
They're
have
entertainers.
to do. Yeah. So I think it's like, we have to be careful as like running purists, maybe not to necessarily criticize them for that, because that would maybe draw that would be an unfortunate reason for us to be butting heads, because it's not something we need to be arguing about. You're
just like, am I lose? Oftentimes I'll ask myself or ask my friends, is that person's journey like impeding your journey in any way? I know that things get more like contentious when it's like they got a brand deal I didn't get, or something that is pretty far down that rabbit hole. But yeah, we can choose who we follow, and like for some reason, this made me think of Max Jolliffe, the ultra runner who was sponsored by Satisfy. I was like, who is this guy? But then like two of my friends who are more like tattooed, like newer runners are like, dude, Max is the best. And I'm like, dude, all right, like, he's your guy who gets you fired up to get after adventures. I can make my own call. I've seen enough videos where I'm like, Max seems like a pretty solid dude. And there's always this layer of confusion. I saw him on a podcast actually where the guys were like, oh man, if trail running was the Olympics, you'd definitely be an Olympian, right? And he's like, oh no. He's like, because I got to UTMB or like CCC and finished wherever he finished, and it wasn't on the podium. He's like, he's deeply respectful. And that's where he appealed to me in his honesty, that he's not saying he's like the best. He did win like a long race in Moab, and they made hats that said King of Moab. And I'm like, oh, that's getting really close to that shit talking the sport, but I get that it's a hustle. Yeah, but again, he's someone we've touched on, like multiple doors that welcome people who are not didn't walk through the sport through the door we came through, right? And it's like, yeah.
And we see this in ultra running now too a little bit, because the marathon is what it is. It's 26.2. Most of the courses don't deviate that drastically. There's some contention between downhill courses, I guess, and flat ones.
Sure.
But generally speaking, like a lot of the races, like Boston qualifying now and Olympic trials qualifying, will make sure that's a non-issue at the very tip of the spear. Within ultra running, there's an interesting thing going on right now where these like 200 plus mile races have gotten really popular as a spectator.
This is crazy.
Thing. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, listen to this. So it's like over the like my kind of career in ultra running, which began around 2010, it's really been the 100-mile distance has been this like fixture sport that people are like, this is where you make the money. This is where you make the career. This is the target. This is the end game. This is what the best of the best aspire to perfect. And along the way, as that grew, and it grew a lot, and it has kept growing to the point where now like Western States 100 and UTMB are pretty unarguably the top two kind of premier events in the sport. But along the way, things like live streaming have come in, storytelling has come in, and these 200 plus milers are generating like so much engagement during the event. And they're creating opportunities for these guys like Max Joliffe, where now we're getting conversations where is there a disproportionate amount of interest, not just for the Max Joliffe did win Moab 240. So I would say, yeah, he's a podium guy, but yeah, you get a guy like Killian Korth, who just won all three of those races this year in record time. And people are looking at him and they're saying, yeah, but he hasn't really been successful at the 100-mile distance. So he's playing around in the shallow end. And here we are at the 100-mile distance, just really, that's where the talent is. And I think that's like such a silly thing to me, because it's like, for one, it's like you're upset because he's getting more attention than maybe some 100-mile specialist is. And you think that 100-mile specialist is faster than him. And part of me is just like, cry about it. Like,
totally.
He showed up there. He showed up to the 200-mile stuff, not because he thought he was going to get a big payday from it. He like spent a ton of money unsponsored to do these events because he wanted to figure out how to do them, because he failed epically the first two times he tried. And he figured out a way to do it. And he figured out a way to do it at such a successful way that he won all three of those races in 1 year. And to me, I think like that would be like kind of like criticizing the original people who got into the Calistoga wagons and went from the East Coast to the West Coast because they didn't do it fast enough.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, it's like the things people say out of jealousy. You're like, wait, so why are you criticizing what they chose to do? I think people often are pointing out some incongruity between what the person did and how hard other people think it is. Maybe this weird. Just to go back to your point about downhill races, like downhill marathoning is 26 miles and it incurs a tremendous amount of muscle damage because of the impact forces. And if you run a time on a downhill course, that's the time you ran on the downhill course. And it's only in this world, like my peer set doesn't take downhill marathoning. We don't pay it any mind. Like it's not discussed. It's not now in this world where people start to run downhill courses to get into Boston. Boston had to do some micro adjustments on time stuff there because people were running like 3,000. I kind of want to someday run a marathon that loses 3,000 feet.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I to bring it back to Truett ran 226 on a downhill course, and then there was just like I came across like the vitriol about it, and this isn't a this, and I'm like, it just is what it is. Now, if everyone's trying to say he's like a 226 marathoner, you'd be like, sure, on a downhill course. I've had this as a writer, I hone in on words, so people will be like, it's not easy running that. I'm like, okay, no one said it was easy. We just said it was a faster condition. If you could run point to point with a huge tailwind, that would also be like, that's harder to repeat or recreate. But I think that the jealousy that comes out when they're like, this guy who ran 3 200 plus mile races, like isn't as good as he says he is, or someone says he is. That's like, how much time do we want to spend like worrying about that? I do think your point about the storytelling is fascinating, because I was following the Cocodona, just like the amount of storytelling, the reels coming out live. They're interviewing the athletes while they're doing the competition.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, it made me so sad for marathoning because I'm like, marathoners are so good. They only get to compete maybe 2, maybe 3 times a year in the big distance, and they certainly can't talk during it.
Right.
And then actually the Cocodon that happened right before the Tour de France, and Tour de France was so popular this summer. And I was like, man, maybe I wish runners could perform at a high level, but do it more so that there was more content and more storytelling. That it's oftentimes like, hey, let's celebrate so-and-so's marathon, but they're not going to run again for quite a while. And in today's day and age of media,
and they're at peak attention too. It's like when they hit peak attention, all of a sudden they can't do the thing that got them that attention for another 6 months.
They're going to be gone. Yeah. So Harold Talby he's an American citizen. He'll be able to compete for us in 2027. We just interviewed him. He just ran 2:05, and you're like, this guy's awesome. But what is there to really say? He's talking about the past. He's not able to bring you in on like his big performance tomorrow, which is what in these ultra races, people are dumbfounded. Like most people come in not even able to grasp what it would take to run 250 miles, which I don't know if I barely can. And so that's like an instant good hook. And then it plays out over enough days that, they're able to pull people in, keep them around, and then do some of the question is like, then hearing nutrition advice from that person 3 days later.
Yep.
It could be good, or it could be like, there's a lot of disordered behavior in all of these types of distance. So you're like, but it's very relatable. Whereas we haven't touched on Kilian. Kilian Jornet came to America, did something that I can barely grasp how difficult it was, and then he flew home. And you're like, that was orders of magnitude more difficult than anything I can even conceive of. But he doesn't particularly worry about it. He's at a level where he both lives his life, and you're like, okay. Whereas content creators, influencers are able to pick these little spots of heat and be like, what if I ran all 6 marathon majors in a year? And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I could see why it sounds, you're calling out this thing where people want to say, that's not as hard as that guy is making it out to seem.
Just a quick reminder that Probio Nutrition is my go-to supplement for all my micronutrients and digestive needs. The reason I like it is it was developed by my good friend, Dr. Mark Bubbs. He has had a lot of experience working with successful individuals that have busy, active lifestyles, including Olympians, NBA basketball players, professional hockey players. One of the things he noticed was a lot of supplements were not only mislabeled, but not very effective. So he went about to try to lower the friction point there by making it as easy as having 1 scoop of Probio Nutrition every day. I will take it with either water, smoothie, or mix it in with my yogurt once per day, and then I'm done. And I can rest at ease knowing that along with a good diet, I'll have all those micronutrients and digestive needs met. Head over to probionutrition.com and enter promo code Endurance for 20% off your next order.
And it is one thing, like that is a good point. If Kilian came out and was like, I'm the best in the sport now, like no one can beat me, I'm the best ultra runner, I'm the top ultra runner in the world, that'd be one thing, because then he would be doing the same thing from the other side of just trying to make false comparisons. But he's not doing that. So like part of me is just, look, this is a guy who he's also really articulate when he's telling you what he does, and he's clearly thought through a lot of this stuff. So it's just as a good story. And I think people struggle with the idea that you can have someone that maybe they're not the most talented person we've ever seen enter the sport, just have a lot of success because all these things lined up where he's got that perfect balance of failure, learning from it, then success. He's really good at talking about it. He's articulate, informative, and there's a bunch of people who are essentially just trying to solve problems in the sport of ultra running, and he's clearly done that and doing it and letting you see it. So to me, it's like that's his selling point. That's why he's worth something. Some of those aspects about him he's just better at. So he should get rewarded for it.
He gets rewarded, and also these guys, I will say, as a fan of ultra running and trail running, but really I consider myself like in the front rows of fandom, but I'm not really a participant. So I'm like, okay, like I was a huge, like I mentioned, Jim Walmsley fan, because I was like, here's a guy who's traditionally fast, who's going to just apply that throwdown. I'm going to try to run every step of it. And fast forward 8 years, and Western States this last year was so exciting. Like it's gotten to a point where, and I don't think this was always true, like it's like throwing a dozen eggs at the wall, and if two don't break, like in this case, Caleb Wilson and Chris Myers, like didn't really break, but they almost like finished on fumes. I saw Chris Myers at TRE, and I was like, man, you finished that. Like I talk about like in an action movie where all four tires are shot out and they're riding into town on the rims. And he's like, dude, and it's evidenced by neither of the top two finishers are coming back this year, because they were like, that took so much out of them. Like, that's for us as our entertainment, but we're probably not going to see the 8 repeat champion, like the winning it 3 years in a row necessarily, or winning it 8 years in a row like back in the day, because the competition's gotten so intense. And Killian at this finish line, he's like, why didn't those guys want to run with me? We could have had a nice time together. Like, they just bolted off the front. So some of these events, I think I'm trying to focus my own energy on being positive of, wow, I can appreciate events that are really extreme but have shallower competition fields, and then I can also appreciate the ones where like they just keep getting steeper and more intense. And you've done this, you've gone to spaces where you're like, winning some of these races won't maybe compel you, so you're like, I want to name some times I want to shoot after, I want to name a pace, I want to test myself, and like you find a way to make it compelling enough that is worth all that you've invested, I have to imagine.
Yeah, for sure. People do like having that idea of what is your goal out of this, and are you going to get, so they can see, people are looking for that sort of that journey. And it's hard to, it's if I turned on Lord of the Rings and they were just kind of wandering through all these areas and having these little battles, but I had no idea what they were trying to do with that ring. Like, it would be like, okay, what's going on here? But because they said, hey, our goal is to get to Mordor and chuck this thing in there, now all of a sudden I have a target that they're striving.
Yeah, now you got me. So some of these events, and also, again, I don't even know trail running as well, but in the exposure I've had, there's a lot of athletes out there who inspire people who are like, I'm never going to be a fast runner, but man, I can be stubborn, I can be consistent. And so they show up and they skip road running, they skip marathoning, and they're like, I now run these like 50K, 50 mile, and I'll be out there all day. I'll take the early start. And I'm just like, damn, huge respect for you. That's technically like the same sport of running, but like such a different application of all these things. And hopefully there's space for different types of runners and different types of content creators. But yeah, I think people sniff out and get angry about like when there's jealousy, or maybe when they feel like people are being disingenuous or like kind of not being honest about this or that. But
yeah, I did want to follow up with you too on because you had shared something with me that I thought was really interesting with respect to just like the doping in sport, as well as now it's not just doping in sport. I guess it's still sport, but it's maybe, do we need to be concerned about doping outside of just people on the podium? And because it's an interesting, I've had big influencers on the podcast, content creators on the podcast, and I do get questions from listeners sometimes that are like, you should ask them about doping. You should ask them about whether they're doping or not doping. And I haven't found a good way to really address it, because for one, usually in most cases, these people have either been on the record saying, this is what I do, and now I'm transparent about it, or they say I'm clean, I'm not doing anything wrong, and then suspicion still is there because maybe they look like Nick Bear, and people are like, yeah, there's no way you can look like that and run that fast, and you get that sort of conversation, and they think he's lying. So it's, for me to ask that question, it's like a speculative question versus any sort of thing that's going to inform us in a way where, because if I have Nick Bear on, I ask him, hey Nick, are you doping? You think he's going to decide all of a sudden just to be like, oh yeah, I am.
Here we
go. I lied to all those other guys, but now that I'm on your podcast, I'm going to totally come clean. He's going to tell me the exact same thing he's told everyone else.
Sure.
For me, it's not an interesting topic unless there's some way that we're trying to solve for the problem that we're really trying to get at there, which is there a way for us to have these content creators and influencers show that the path they're taking is similar to someone else who's trying to do it clean? Or if they're not doing it clean, just be transparent about it so we can apply that sort of variable to their results. And
that's what I'm curious about. Yeah. Is there a way to, sorry, you go.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think like you proposed like an idea that I thought is probably about as unique, that you could, like, say you have a big influencer on, this would just be a question you could ask them what they think about. And then that would be a way to introduce that topic without just saying, hey, are you doping? And then we just get speculation, which doesn't really get us anywhere at the end of the day. But when you described, which athlete did you say it was? One of the Adidas athletes had put.
Yeah, Sebastian Sauer, who
Sauer.
won Berlin, and you're like, we're at a level where World Anti-Doping Association has their own protocols, and then that whole system is not perfect, but it is the system. And I was curious, in a world where I can go down the street and get a blood test for any number of things, like, will it become more popular to say, oh, would you be how do I say this? Would you be willing to submit yourself and participate in that pool of like random drug testing by certain standards? I will admit, I pretty quickly get to the edge of what I even know about doping, because I took an iron supplement when I was doing my marathoning, and that was the extent of it. So people start to say, that guy's on peptides or this, and I'm like,
right,
what is this again? Like, so it's a little bit hard to ever get your hands around, because on one end you have the never-ending gray area of things people might be doing, and then on the other side you have, we have a formalized protocol that's rather expensive to implement, that tests for these things in these ways. And there's any number of amazing stories from Olympians who are like, you need to be ready you have to update your whereabouts, you have to so that you can't avoid testing because testing or doping, I imagine, I grew up during the Lance era and had my heart broken by someone I thought just was pure and hard worker, and then turns out he just was better at doping. He's a very good cyclist, but better at doping than everyone else, more brazen. And so it's hard to imagine what we would even be proposing, but I do think it will be increasingly. We were talking about how they used to, and they still do, test the podium, maybe test down the first, within the top 10, some random, which would be to prevent a certain athlete from doping, because out of fear, it would be a deterrent. Whereas if we were talking about Truett Haynes because he's the most famous person to try to go for the trials. I've been interviewing all these people who have left smaller platforms than him. So that's why we're discussing him. When you used to finish on the podium, get the spotlight, get the camera crew, and then also get tested as a result. And now you could finish 70th at CIM, be doped to the gills, bring your own platform. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying, whoa, the incentive structure is totally tilted on its side, that these platforms that we're using, for instance, everyone gets to run these races 26.2 miles, almost precisely. They get the benefit of that. Now, technically, people have pointed out, when you sign up, in the terms of agreement, you say that you're agreeing to certain things, like not taking performance enhancing drugs. I had forgotten that was in that verbiage, and for most of us, just ignore it, because it's not really, who's it hurt? And you're increasingly in a world of AI and weird claims, are we going to want to know, will there be a protocol by which these athletes that we spend a lot of attention on submit themselves to saying, I want to prove that I haven't been microdosing testosterone? And I don't know if it'll happen, mostly because it's two different communities. The people who care about performance and pure sport are not always really paying attention to the people who have the biggest platform. So I'll click on a profile and be like, this guy has 900,000 followers, and I'm just hearing about him. He's having a big influence on a lot of people, and I have no idea. So I think it'll continue to come up. I know that testing at a lot of these races is problematic because it's so expensive to implement that it comes about for a little while, and then it, from what I hear, it tends to just go by the wayside at a lot of races, because people weren't really asking for it. It's definitely a huge expense. The race director has to make some calls and yada. What I don't want is, I personally don't want to spend much time on the internet and message forums and comment sections understanding what are the claims against this person, and it's just that's where I start to be all right, this person can take on whatever they want to take on, but I'm gonna hold it in a certain light if there was no real testing. It's
it's interesting because it's one of those things where there's a lot of moving parts where is it reasonable to expect someone to fund that out of pocket with what it costs? And once you hit a certain revenue stream from your business, you could look as you built this business on credibility, so just you should fix that into your expense sheet the way any business would do to get past any sort of regulation that gets put in place or something like that. And I could see that being something that would maybe be a reasonable expectation if it were. I think it would actually probably be something that would have to grow within that community, where it's like all of a sudden someone with a big platform says, hey, look, I understand this is a question a lot of people have. I'm going to have third-party testing document this, and I'm going to do it. And then all of a sudden the next person who decides to parrot that person and do their challenge, that's where the expectation got set. So if you almost have a scenario where if you don't do it, I don't like guilt by association necessarily, but I think this would maybe be a scenario where if we could do a good job of it, I think it would be good to almost make that the expectation when you're going to monetize the sport the way you are, based on the assumption you're clean, or at least partly you're clean.
Yeah, like these moments of like where there is competition and there is multiple people. We love as humans like watching boxing fights and like running races and clashes of competition. So yeah, I've heard reports of like so-and-so when they were running across America were just like getting IV bags and they were getting like injections of this. And you're like, okay, like how do I even get my hands around that? It's like a very uncertified, it's not a, there's, I'm sure elements of FKT, fastest known performances, but like it's much more loose. And so yeah, you start to get into the shadows and it's smaller and smaller groups. Whereas, yeah, I think if you get into these zones, like I'm forgetting what the drug testing protocol is say at UTMB, but that's where there's so much competition. Whereas we're already approaching like these 250s. And yeah, I'm not sure even feel like an old man. Like, I don't even know necessarily
no testing
what
at
we
those.
would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like some of the,
okay.
like Western States has testing now, and even like some of the qualifying races do, but it's super elementary compared to what you'd expect to actually catch. If you catch someone doping at Western States, you got probably one of two scenarios. The person was totally ignorant, or the person actually got screwed and they had some sort of supplement that was tainted and they just weren't doing due diligence in terms of making sure they were accounting for what they put in their body and saving it. Because it's just one of those things where I think if you're doing in competition testing only, like, you know, who are you going to catch at that point?
That's where I think it was Francisco Pupi who put out something saying, this is an issue. I just want to flag it. Yeah. If you get popped for a positive test at the competition, you've just really messed things up, because he's basically saying you can do a lot of micro dosing and such, like cycles of these things out of competition and then just show up. And I've heard those. It's sad. Like it would be harder for me if I was super obsessed with some of these events, like I am the world majors, if they were like, oh, no one's testing these top guys from Kenya and Ethiopia for 9 months out of the year, and then they show up, that would draw down my enthusiasm. So I'm like, yeah, I'm appreciative of what does exist, even if it's definitely flawed.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because it's where I also hesitate is if we're going to apply the reasoning of there's these influencers that are doping and not telling us and producing these results, and that's going to mislead people in terms of where their expectations should be. Are we even doing a good enough job to do that with the pro athletes? Because we catch more of them, and there's probably a better deterrent there, but I think it's a marginally better deterrent for the most part. So,
and it's like prize money, whereas like they show up with their money machine. Like like I said, if you show up to the Boston Marathon and you shoot 6 ads, like you're getting paid by brands that don't necessarily care even what time you run. And that's where it's a real mind bender for those of us traditionalists who are like, why is the guy who ran 2:53 at Boston like getting paid by all these brands?
Right.
What is going on? And you're like, hey, it's a different thing that's intersecting with the thing we think we know. And maybe that community will choose to decide that like they care about anti-doping protocols or not. Again, I don't mean to say shade, like breaking 3 hours for like a healthy, fit man is not that difficult, to the point where I think that's where like the outsized, when people are like, this guy's a champion, and you're like, oh, he did something that many adult men can do. But to your point from a while back, like most of those people have those platforms not because they broke free, but because they have relentlessly told stories and brought people along and built like whole followings. So you're like, it's just a very different thing. It's pretty wild how it shows up on the same Sundays, and you're like, this is 2 different worlds.
Yeah. It is interesting. We have the same playground, but 2 very different communities almost to some degree. And it's like, how do we make this work out in a way that makes sense enough to people, or to some degree, maybe we're just like arguing about stuff that is somewhat somewhat pointless.
Yeah.
But yeah,
to me, as long as like the Olympic trials still happen, like that's why there was at risk. I had heard rumors years ago that like the Olympic Marathon Trials might not happen because it's more the way that event gets put together. It's very expensive, and I'm like, oh, that would be such a loss.
Yeah.
If like brands are like, I would be heartbroken if they're so invested in these people with huge platforms that they just stop investing in sponsoring America's best definitive, like performance graded best athletes. That would be hard for me, but it seems like right now we're hanging in this zone where both are happening, so that's okay. Oh man, it's so fun to chop all this stuff up with you. We've gone longer
absolutely.
than I thought, but
I should probably let you get back to whatever else you're up to today at some point here. But no, it's been a blast to chat, Peter, and maybe we'll have to do another one down the road when some other exciting topics come up if you're down for it.
Absolutely. As you can tell, there's a lot to discuss. And I'm always happy to discuss it with someone who knows this, is so obsessed with these like little details as I am.
It is fun for sure. But before I let you go, I do want to let the listeners know where they can find you if they want to check out podcast, Substack, website, any of that stuff.
Yeah, I write on Substack, bromka.substack.com. I title my publication Writing on Running, and those are just infrequent essays. I don't write like on any cadence, but that's just about the running world. I'm at Bromka, Bromka on Instagram. And then, I've been spinning up Road to the Trials. So it's like a bounty of goodness. I don't even know where to start. Like we're interviewing nurses, we're interviewing pro athletes, we're interviewing moms of 4 kids, and they're all just crushing it. And my hope is that if you dip into that Instagram, jump over to the podcast feed, there will be someone who really like inspires and relates to you. But I'm very aware that these are people from all over the country, very different walks of life, but the thing they have in common is they're just like really committed to running fast over distance. And I just can't get enough of it. So we're 2 years out from the Olympic Marathon Trials. Hopefully I'll have much more context and stories to tell in the future, but it just keeps coming and it's been super fun. So thanks for talking about it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.